Now that's what I call an entrance.
Not impressed.
Wasn't very nice, Snowflake.
First, I'll freeze your mouth closed.
Abducted as infants, Bi-Han and Kuai Liang were taken by the Lin Kuei assassin clan. When Bi-Han was murdered by the vengeful Scorpion, Kuai mastered the power of ice and replaced his codename of Tundra with his fallen brother's mantle of Sub-Zero. Travelling to the Outworld tournament with fellow assassin Smoke, Kuai Liang defeated Scorpion in Mortal Kombat, but was re-abducted by his former comrades and horrifically transformed into a cyborg ninja. However, Earthrealm's defenders eventually managed to recapture Sub-Zero and destroy the enslaving protocols. Upon joining Earth's defenders from Shao Kahn's forces, Kuai Liang also battled with his resurrected brother, whom was now an agent of the Netherealm sorcerer Quan Chi. The Cryomancer was shortly thereafter killed by the Outworld Empress Sindel. Despite no longer being a man, Kuai Liang maintained enough of his soul that Quan Chi found use for his restless spirit, and transformed him into one of his new revenant servants. Years later, towards the end of the Netherealm War, Kuai Liang's former allies were able to restore him to the land of the living, along with a few other of Quan Chi's servants. After this, Sub-Zero vowed to destroy the Cyber Lin Kuei and defend his world from new threats. With the aid of the Shaolin Master Bo Raicho, Kuai Liang managed to destroy his old clan. He would live on to reform the Lin Kuei, in the hope of restoring their honour by pledging themselves to the defence of Earthrealm. The now Grandmaster Sub-Zero would even discover the truth behind the deaths of his brother and Scorpion's family, and so the two former enemies formed an alliance and set aside their past conflicts. Sub-Zero was instrumental in the instruction and maturing of Earthrealm's new generation of defenders, whom would go on to defeat the fallen Elder God Shinnok. Sub-Zero's final fate is not yet revealed to us, but he and his fellow Lin Kuei remain fierce defenders of Earthrealm. Born into a life of luxury, Oliver Queen inherited his comfortable life after the death of his parents whilst he was still young. Oliver didn't care much for the world, and lived as a drunken playboy with almost a complete disregard for anyone else. After being left to drown by one of his former employees in the middle of the ocean, Queen washed up on what was thought to be a deserted island. Oliver possessed a natural talent for archery, and so used his talents to hunt and survive within the wilderness for months, finally learning the importance of independence. After spending a prolonged period on the island, Oliver discovered a drug cartel, led by the drug lord China White. Oliver subverted the cartel's plans, destroyed their refinery, and freed the slaves. For the first time in his life, Oliver found himself caring about others, and justice. He decided to use his talents for the greater good, and vowed to protect the citizens of his home Star City, becoming the vigilante nicknamed Green Arrow. Oliver's time as a hero was met with many grueling trials and tribulations, but also earned him new friends, as well as some respectable colleagues and sidekicks, such as Roy Harper, his own son Connor Hawke, and Mia Dearden. The Emerald Archer would become a valued member of the Justice League. Despite being one of the supposedly weaker members of the team, Green Arrow proved his worth on numerous occasions, and it was through his membership to the League that he met and fell in love with Dina Lance, also known as the Black Canary. His desire to protect his home city was so deep that it led him to becoming the newly elected mayor. Time and time again, Oliver Queen demonstrated himself as a man of courage and a true hero of the people. His legacy will stand the test of time for generations to come. For the purposes of this matchup, we will be observing Sub-Zero primarily as of the rebooted Mortal Kombat timeline, so his appearances within the 2011 installment of the series, Mortal Kombat X, and the tie-in comic series will be our primary source material. Green Arrow's analysis will primarily be of his depiction before the New 52 reboot, with his appearances within the various comic series being observed. Any images or footage of these characters from other timelines or continuities are for the sake of visual flair. Now on with the video.
Round 1.
As a man that possesses the DNA of both humans and the ancient Cryomancer race, Sub-Zero's physical prowess sits roughly on the level of borderline superhuman. Sean Kittleson, the writer of the Mortal Kombat X comic series, would go on to state that the majority of combatants within the franchise that have some form of magic in their blood, Sub-Zero included, are to be considered above peak human on the basis of their physicality. His entire life's training forging his body into a weapon, Kuai Liang had inherited enough strength to grant him the ability to easily overpower most opponents, as well as send them flying, and even compete with the strength of an enraged scorpion whilst injured. He's been witnessed ripping people in half with one arm, whilst they are frozen in place, and has torn apart the armoured members of the Cyber Lin Kuei. These demonstrations of strength would be carried over into his in-game fatalities, and vice versa. As a former assassin, Kuai Liang's speed and reflexes were refined to their utmost potential, allowing him to anticipate and evade missiles, whether at a distance or close range. And he has disabled targets of similar physical capability before they have the chance to react. He's fought and defeated multiple opponents in quick succession, demonstrating great stamina. However, Sub-Zero's personal perseverance and durability are some of the most incredible displays of resilience, even among his fellow Earthrealmers. Beyond tanking a blast to the face from Kano's eye laser and fighting Johnny Cage after being thrown out of a helicopter, his Cryomancer biology appears to award him with a natural resistance to fire, as seen by his ability to withstand being briefly engulfed by the 3000-degree heat of Sector's flamethrower, and go on to fight back. His most impressive display comes from his fight with Hanzo Hasashi, whilst he is temporarily possessed by the demon of the Kamadogu dagger. Prior to being released of his mental prison, he sustained 2 simultaneous impalements from Scorpion's kunai spears, along with their subsequent imbuing of hellfire, and yet after being freed from his possession, he still managed to continue fighting through the lingering effects of these wounds, and went on to tank a flame-engulfed kick to the face, a double stab through the chest, and even survive brief exposure to the even more powerful hellfire breath of his enraged opponent. Afterwards he managed to hold out long enough for aid, and proved himself as a man that is virtually unbreakable by pain and damage, and he will continue to give his all until a fight is finished. Green Arrow remains in his middle age, and his physicality as a result sits well within its prime. Oliver has repeatedly applied his strength in combat to allow him to easily incapacitate other opponents, has been able to throw a fully grown man across a room with a single arm, and rip himself free from rope restraints. Conversely, he can endure hits from opponents of even greater physical prowess. He's been on the receiving end of numerous physical strikes from superhuman opponents, and has endured being tossed around like a rag doll, even managing to take a punch from the superpowered zombie Solomon Grundy to his face, rolling with a hit and continuing on. Beyond the stereotypical badassery of fighting through the effects of stabs and being shot, Green Arrow has also endured brief exposure to icy water, and has withstood the effects of close-range explosions. By far one of his most impressive demonstrations of tenacity comes from his survival and recovery of being stabbed through the heart. As a man who spends entire nights fighting crime, it goes without saying that exhaustion is a rarity for the Emerald Archer. Even so, his agility and speed pose just as much of a threat to his enemies. Much like many of the other peak human heroes that he fights alongside, Oliver has been able to anticipate and avoid gunfire, and has frequently made use of acrobatics whilst fighting. This quick timing also granted Oliver a ridiculous ability to fire off an astounding 29 arrows a minute. Every demonstration of speed and strength that Green Arrow can be attributed to has been accomplished whilst operating at full capacity and while sporting injuries that would otherwise remove others from a fight. All in all, Oliver Queen is a man that is exceedingly well-rounded in all physical aspects. He'll be able to hold his own in a physical contest against a wide array of superhuman opponents, Both Sub-Zero and Green Arrow have forged their bodies into powerful weapons through ridiculously strenuous training. Both are men who are practically impervious to the effects of exhaustion, and both take their use of agility to a remarkable level, unattained by all but the best and each other. However, there is still an edge to be given. While Green Arrow is fiercely resilient, Sub-Zero has fought through injuries that would prove similarly, if not more so debilitating for lesser warriors, to the point where he appears to be virtually unfazed by them at all. His high levels of strength, in the form of ripping people apart, whether flesh and blood or armoured cyborgs, should place his strength capacity at a more appreciable level than Mr. Queen. Essentially, Sub-Zero matches Green Arrow's physical prowess and takes it a step further. Sub-Zero is awarded the physical edge.
Round 2.
As a man who doesn't carry any weapons, the most potent tool in Sub-Zero's arsenal is his infamous mastery of cryokinesis, which grants him the ability to create and manipulate ice. Now, while some may disregard a lot of the various ways in which Kuai Liang is able to use his powers as game mechanics, I would personally have to disagree, especially considering the fact that not only are these mechanics implemented to give us an understanding of how each combatant fights within the Mortal Kombat universe, but a great many of Sub-Zero's abilities have been replicated within the comics as well, which of course are part of the current canon. Sub-Zero's ability to freeze opponents can be manifested by simple physical contact, or by hurling a simple blast of ice at his target. The level of control that he has achieved through doing this has allowed him to freeze enemies fully, or even specific body parts. He is capable of channeling his powers through the ground to either catch his opponents off guard, or he can slide upon the frozen stream to enhance his speed and potentially take out his opponent. The options afforded to him was extremely extensive. He can fashion single or dual swords, shields that he can wield on his arm in tandem with said swords, or shields that engulf his entire back or body that are covered in spikes, with the ability to potentially impale targets. Essentially, any solid, non-mechanically functioning object that you can think of, Sub-Zero can create it, with all but a split second's thought. This ability to freeze didn't just have the ability to be directed at his opponents, but he could also use it upon himself. He can use this ability to essentially teleport in combat, by scattering his body into tiny ice particles and reforming them in a better position, aiding in his ability to catch foes off guard. What's more, not only is Sub-Zero provided with a mass array of options of how to wield his power, he is also extraordinarily powerful. While he did manage to freeze an entire city, this is not within the usual scope of Sub-Zero's power, as he was amplified by the power of one of Raiden's Kamadogu daggers, which Hanzo, Asashi and Takedo pointed out. Regardless, Sub-Zero was powerful enough to stagger an enraged Scorpion whilst injured. His swords could parry the blows of Scorpion's Hellfire-imbued weapons. He could freeze virtually any target through its core near instantly, weakening its structure and allowing it to shatter upon being struck. He's done this to solid steel chains, human skulls, and has even done so to multiple doors of an old fallout shelter. He was also powerful enough to stalemate Sector's flamethrower, which was burning oxyhydro fuel at 3000 degrees, despite, in his own words, he'd been holding back the whole time. By far his most incredible demonstration of his own power was shown when Cyrax initiated the self-destruct directive from deep within the underground fallout shelter. Despite being several stories underground and the explosion destroying part of the forest as well as the facility, Sub-Zero was able to summon up a shield powerful enough to protect himself from the explosion, seemingly with no strain, whilst initially still inside the facility. And finally, he also appeared to possess a certain level of resistance to the powers of somewhat weaker cryomancers, such as Frost. All in all, Sub-Zero's cryokinesis not only offers him a mass multitude of options in combat, but also provides him with extreme raw power. These powers will be of aid to the Grand Master no matter what type of opposition he squares off with. As a man with no superpowers, Green Arrow's arsenal consists of a highly advanced array of weaponry, to better enable him to counter those enemies of a more unusual nature, namely his trick arrows, alongside his conventional ones. Oliver Queen has an arrow for almost any situation, but for the purposes of this video, we will only be going over the ones he uses on a consistent basis, as it would take far too long to list every single type of arrow he's employed over the course of his career. His standard arrows were of the norm, with 75 to 90 cm shafts, and a steel head. If he needs to restrain someone from a distance, he can entrap them with a net or bolo arrow, both of which were activated by tiny hidden springs. If he needs to obtain greater positioning, he can employ the use of a rope or zip line. He possessed elemental based arrows, such as fire and cryo, which were powerful enough to put out small fires. The fire arrows were not only fashioned in the typical manner of being able to ignite objects within the environment, but he also possessed an arrow that he referred to as the Greek fire arrow, which is essentially a chemical bomb that can burn ever more so effectively when exposed to water. But he also possessed explosives with different degrees of destructive capacity, which could be ignited by a timer or upon impact. To buy himself valuable seconds and rethink his strategy, he can employ the use of smoke bombs, tear gas, or flashbangs, typically magnesium flares. He even employed the use of a boxing glove arrow for when he needs to punch someone in the face whilst he's too far away. As an expert swordsman, Oliver would occasionally employ the use of a katana against his enemies in close quarters. However, even without such a weapon, Ollie could make use of his bow instead, which has proven its worth as an effective melee weapon, time and time again. As a failsafe, Green Arrow outfitted his quiver with an electronic device that would completely incapacitate anyone other than himself who tried to rid him of his arsenal and kit. Overall, Green Arrow is nothing short of a walking assortment of weaponry. The vast amount of tools at his disposal is a pivotal part of his ability to contend with those who completely outclass him, and will be of benefit in the grand majority of scenarios. This is a somewhat unusual verdict, as I don't usually have to judge powers against weapons. So, which is more useful in combat? On the one hand, Green Arrow's arsenal has the potential to provide him with a wider array of manners to manipulate the environment around him. On the other hand, Sub-Zero's powers have the ability to be manifested in a manner that can award greater environmental positioning, and take the form of any melee weapon he chooses, which will have a more tangible benefit in close quarters. That's not for mentioning that a vast quantity of Oliver's arrows can potentially have their special effects cancelled out by the Grand Master simply freezing them mid-flight. It could be argued that Queen's Greek fire arrow could prove detrimental towards the Lin Kuei, as it reacts worse to water, such as the water in ice. But the primary difference between Sub-Zero and Killer Frost that makes it more detrimental to her than him is the fact that her body is covered in ice, whereas Sub-Zero's is more flesh and blood. Even at a distance, Sub-Zero's powers still possess a variety of ways that can be used to off-balance his opponent. Not to mention, Green Arrow has no defense against being frozen through physical contact. Essentially, Sub-Zero's cryokinesis offers a solid counter to most, if not all of Queen's arsenal, and provides him with more angles to pressure his enemy. Sub-Zero is awarded the edge for his arsenal.
Round 3.
Sub-Zero was trained from infancy to become the deadliest assassin he could be, in both the aspects of his powers and his skills as a martial artist, and his training definitely paid off. His chosen fighting styles in the current canon are not confirmed. However, since the only real changes in the new timeline are a few changes to history, as opposed to any character's combative capabilities, it is perfectly rational to assume that Sub-Zero still possesses the same skill set from the old timeline, as his demonstrated abilities are so similar. In the original timeline, his fighting styles were labelled as Shotokan, as in Shotokan Karate, Dragon, the Dragon variation of Kung Fu, as well as possessing skills with the Kori blade, his preferred choice of sword. Shotokan karate is a form that is characterized by its lengthy and deep sweeps, as well as powerful strikes, creating a dynamic martial art, allowing its practitioners to develop an increased fluidity of their movements. Dragon Kung Fu involves the use of hard strikes and blocks, with a smooth reptilian economy of motion that allows for more fluid transitions, which in turn aids the practitioner in disguising their attack, bolstering their unpredictability, and proving very difficult for the opponent to effectively counter. This unpredictable approach to combat is something Sub-Zero has been seen taking advantage of, and further improving upon by the use of feints, intended to trick opponents into thinking he's at a disadvantage, opening them up to attack in the process.
A feint. Bravo.
Kung Jin, you should rally your companions rather than mock your superiors.
Another focus of Dragon Kung Fu relies on the use of evasion for defense, a mentality that Kuai Liang seems to have improved upon by disappearing through his use of ice-based teleportation, further bolstering his unpredictability in a fight. His preference for use of Kori blades and other various weapons also speaks to his skills and experience as a user of melee weapons. He could fashion these weapons at a moment's notice, incorporating their use into his martial arts sequences, throwing off his opponents. While perfectly capable of relying solely on his martial arts skills, or his cryomancer powers, Kuai Liang has a preference for neither, and as can be seen in the aforementioned examples, he melds both together, balancing out his approaches to combat, which further speaks to his capabilities as a tactician, and his achievements of defeating opponents of greater strength and sometimes power only further testifies to his effectiveness in doing so. As he was originally trained as an assassin, Sub-Zero has no problem with killing his target when forced to, though he will try to avoid doing so if he can.
I would kill you, but that is not my purpose here.
All in all, Sub-Zero is a fiercely skillful and effective martial artist, a man who takes full advantage of everything available to him, and is capable of overthrowing even the most powerful and experienced of warriors. He'll prove an immensely troublesome foe for virtually anyone. Oliver Queen is a man who honed his skills through many years of experience fighting crime to a world-class level, having gone toe-to-toe with some of the deadliest martial artists the Earth has to offer, including the world-class assassin Deathstroke, the resurrected Revenger the Red Hood, and the world's greatest detective Batman. And he's been trained by some of the world's most renowned instructors. He's been known to study Judo, Karate, and Kickboxing. Judo is a form of martial arts that were derived from Jiu-Jitsu, intended to train the body and mind, with a focus on pinning maneuvers to immobilize opponents. Karate is a martial art which involves striking out at enemies' joints, but also incorporates the use of locks and throws. Kickboxing simply incorporates the use of martial arts into the form of standard boxing, adding additional techniques for a practitioner to defeat an opponent. He would add other forms to his repertoire upon going into hiding for a year, studying Eastern forms, and even training under Natas, the former master of Deathstroke. In addition to his skills in these various forms of hand-to-hand combat, Green Arrow is recognized as the world's greatest archer, and as such, he fuses his skills in archery and martial arts together. His aim was so true that not only could he hit incredibly small targets from extreme distances, but he could also use such accuracy to disarm opponents of their weapons, manipulate the environment to his favor, or even launch multiple arrows at once to off-throw his foe. Oliver's tactical insight was both deceptive and virtually unpredictable. He's shown great skill in manipulating opponents to force a desired opening, distracting his opposition, resulting in them briefly lowering their guard, or by allowing him to exploit a known weakness in his target. I believe the best on-screen representation of this tactical ability comes from his misunderstanding with the regime-deserting Flash from the Injustice video game. While this game exists within its own separate continuity, it is relatively consistent with the capabilities of all its characters, Oliver included.
My God, Ollie, is that you?
In the flesh.
Where's Batman? My Batman.
He's off somewhere not being a murderer.
Oh, come on, Ollie. You know you can't hit me.
Wasn't trying to. Gotta think fast to be fast.
This insidiously use of deception is what allowed Green Arrow to defeat, or at the very least hold his own against foes of superhuman strength and power who completely outclass him, as his manipulation of them can undermine their advantages. Finally, Ollie mastered the use of sword fighting during his time in exile, demonstrating great skill against Deathstroke during their fight, skill of which Slade himself was forced to admit. This masterful use of the blade also allowed him to best Jason Todd during their fight. In conclusion, Oliver Queen is a man who knows how to handle himself in almost any situation, one able to carry himself through a fight no matter how badly the odds are stacked against him. He will prove a tough nut to crack against anyone. This is definitely the hardest category to judge, as both of our combatants bring their own unique approaches to combat, and only further enhance them through the unorthodox methods of incorporating their chosen arsenals into said fighting styles. While I am of the opinion that Sub-Zero's Cryomancer powers are a more useful tool to have, Green Arrow applies his own bag of tricks just as skillfully. Oliver's manipulation of the environment, dirty fighting, and incorporation of various trick arrows is perfectly counterbalanced by Kuai Liang's use of feints, misdirection, and incorporated use of the different aspects of his cryomancy. These are two fighters who offer perfect counters to each other on almost every level, both of which hold their own unique advantages, and excellent skill to back it up. As such, neither combatant will be awarded the edge for their martial skills, as I consider both to possess an advantage of equal benefit.
Final round.
A fight between Sub-Zero and Green Arrow will be an excellent display of martial prowess and tactical misdirection. As a final tally, I would personally award the victor a 7-10 majority. To set the stage, we'll set this fight up in Shao Kahn's arena. Unfamiliar with his new opponent, Green Arrow would likely open fire with his standard arrows, testing Sub-Zero's ability, looking to score an early advantage. However, Sub-Zero evades and seeks to close the distance, possibly through use of his Ice Slide. Upon gaining ground, Green Arrow would likely attempt to off-throw his opponent through the use of trick arrows, backing away and firing a flashbang, smoke or bolo. Not expecting such an attack, Sub-Zero is caught off guard, and GA begins unleashing his martial might upon the stunned ninja. However, he'd find that Sub-Zero was perfectly capable of taking such a beating, whom either blind fires an ice blast into the ground to free himself and forces Arrow to evade, or vanishes into ice and reappears behind, striking his enemy in the back. At this point, both combatants would just keep exchanging trick arrows for icy counters. Eventually, they would meet in the middle and engage in close quarters, trading blows with ice swords and bows, tossed arrows deflected by ice shields. The final struggle would be a grueling battle. However, Sub-Zero's greater strength would deal more damage, and he would buy himself more openings through his physical contact freezing. At last, in one swift motion, a frozen fist hits the Emerald Archer in the face, halting his momentum, and is preceded with an ice-cold sting of a Kori blade through the chest. Battered and beaten, I declare Kuai Liang, the Lin Kuei Grand Master, the Cryomancer, aka Sub-Zero, the winner.
Sub-Zero wins.
Alright ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed this matchup, regardless of any opinion on the verdict. Remember, the primary purpose of my Versus series is to entertain you guys, so if you enjoyed, then I'm satisfied with my work. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts and any questions you may have. Also, I have a quick question for you guys. A couple of weeks ago, I uploaded an update to the channel's upload schedule, also revealing the next 3 videos to come after it, this one being the last. Is this something you would like to see? A regular update on what's next on schedule? Be sure to let me know, I'm interested to see if this is something you'd like. Anyway, enough from me for today, so until next time, goodbye, and may the Force be with you.